The forgotten letter in Grandpa's hat. Sitting here on this old porch, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of amber and gold, reminds me of a story I ain't told in quite some time. A story about how sometimes the most valuable treasures are hidden in plain sight, waiting for just the right moment to be discovered. You know, life has a funny way of tucking away the things we need most, only to reveal when we're finally ready to understand their true value. This here's the story of my grandfather's hat, a simple letter, and how sometimes what seems lost is just waiting to be found at the exact right moment. My name's Thomas McCreary, though most folks round these parts just call me Tom. I was born and raised in Whispering Pines, a little slice of heaven nestled between rolling hills and vast open plains in rural Montana. The kind of place where everybody knows your business before you do, where a handshake still means something, and where the night sky puts on a light show that'd make the big city folks weep with wonder. My grandfather, Samuel McCreary, was something of a legend in these parts. Folks called him Steady Sam, on account of his unwavering reliability and that calm demeanor that never seemed to crack, no matter what life threw his way. He had these eyes that seemed to see right through you, not in an uncomfortable way, but like he could spot the true nature of your character without you saying a word. Sam always wore this weathered brown Stetson hat. Wasn't nothing fancy, mind you. Had a simple leather band, faded from years under the Montana sun, and a shape that perfectly matched the contours of his head, like it was an extension of the man himself. That hat went everywhere with him. Church on Sundays, cattle drives, family dinners, even my grandmother's funeral. I reckon that hat knew more about life than most people ever will. I spent every summer at my grandparents' ranch from the time I was knee-high to a grasshopper until I was old enough to work the land myself. Those were simple days, but Lord, they were rich. Days spent learning how to mend fences, tend to livestock, and respect the land that provided for us. Nights spent on this very porch, listening to Grandpa's stories while the crickets provided the background music and fireflies performed their dancing light show across the fields. A man's word and a day's honest work are the only two things nobody can take from you, Grandpa would say, his voice like well-worn leather, rough around the edges but surprisingly soft. Everything else is just borrowed, Tom. Remember that. When I was about 12 years old, I remember asking him about that hat of his. It was a particularly hot July afternoon, and we were talking a break in the shade of the old oak tree that still stands yonder. Grandpa, how come you never take off that hat? Ain't you got others? He chuckled, remove into Stetson and turning it over in his weathered hands. This here ain't just a hat, Tommy. It's a keeper of memories. Every stain, every crease, every faded spot tells a story. He ran his thumb along the band. And sometimes it holds secrets too valuable to risk losing dot. At the time, I figured he was just spinning yarns like old folks tend to do. Giving mayonnaise to ordinary things, because that's what happens when you've lived long enough to appreciate the beauty and simplicity. I didn't understand then what he meant, but Lord knows, I sure do now. When Grandpa Sam passed on, I was 27 years old, working as a ranch hand 2 counties over. I'd visit when I could, but not nearly as often as I should have. You know how it is when you're that age, too busy chasing tomorrow to properly appreciate today. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Grandma had found him peaceful-like in his favorite chair on the porch, hat resting on his knee, like he'd just decided to take a longer nap than usual. Heart gave out, Doc said, quick and painless. A good death, if there is such a thing. The funeral was held 3 days later at the little white church in town. Seemed like the whole county showed up to pay their respects. Ranchers, shopkeepers, the banker, even old Miss Harriet who ran the post office and hadn't left her house in nearly a decade. That's the kind of impact Grandpa had on folks. After the service, we gathered back at the ranch. The house felt different somehow, like the very walls knew their master was gone and were grieving in their own quiet way. As folks shared stories and broke bread together, my grandmother pulled me aside and pressed Grandpa's hat in my hands. He wanted you to have this, she said, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. Said you'd know what to do with it when the time was right. I accepted the hat, running my fingers along the brim the way I'd seen him do countless times. It felt wrong somehow, holding this piece of him, knowing he'd never wear it again. But I nodded, thanked her, and tucked it under my arm. Truth be told, I didn't know what to do with that hat. It sat on the passenger seat of my truck for the drive home, then found a spot on my dresser where it collected dust for the better part of a year. Every now and then, I'd pick it up, turn it over in my hands, and try to figure out what Grandpa had meant. What was I supposed to do with an old cowboy hat? Life has a way of moving forward whether you're ready or not. I met Sarah at a livestock auction the following spring. She was smart as a whip, with auburn hair that caught fire in the sunlight and a laugh that could make even the sourest old ranch hand crack a smile. She worked for the County Agricultural Extension Office, helping farmers implement sustainable practices. Educated, but not in that high and mighty way some folks get when they've spent too much time in classrooms and not enough time with their hands in the dirt. We courted proper-like, as Grandpa would have approved of. Sunday dinners with her folks, long drives down country roads with no particular destination in mind, dancing under the stars at the county fair. By Christmas, I was savant up for a ring, figuring I'd ask her come springtime. But February brought trouble. The ranch where I was working sold to some investment group from California. New owners had no interest in cattle. Wanted to turn the whole operation into some kind of luxury retreat for city folks looking to play cowboy for a weekend. Just like that, I was out of job, along with 3 other fellas who'd worked that land for decades. Jobs were scarce, and my savings wouldn't last forever. Sarah stood by me, bless her heart, even as the weeks stretched into months with no prospects in sight. I started talking odd jobs, fence mending, equipment repair, anything to keep the lights on. Pride's a funny thing. It can keep a man standing when his legs want to buckle, but it can also blind him to the hands reached out to help. One particularly rough day, after learning I'd been passed over for a foreman position at the Wilson spread in favor of the owner's nephew, I came home to find Sarah sitting on my porch steps. "My uncle's offering you a job," she said without preamble. "His foreman's retiring into the month. Ranch is over in Silverdale County." I bristled. "I don't need charity, especially not from your family." Her eyes flashed. "It ain't charity, Tom McCreary. It's an opportunity, and you're too stubborn to see it because your pride's in the way." She stood up, dusting off her jeans. "Uncle Frank needs someone who knows ranching, not someone related to him. But fine, keep paying your bills with stubbornness. Let me know how that works out." She stormed off, leaving me standing there like a fence post. I went inside, anger and shame wrestling in my gut. My gaze landed on Grandpa's hat, still perched on my dresser. Without thinking, I snatched it up and hurled it across the room. It hit the wall with a soft thud and fell to the floor, the crown dented slightly from the impact. Immediately, regret washed over me. I crossed the room and picked up the hat, gently trying to reshape the crown. As I worked the felt between my fingers, something crinkled inside the inner band. Curious, I ran my fingers along the lining and discovered a small slit in the leather, carefully sewn, but noticeable if you were looking for it. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. With trembling fingers, I carefully extracted it and unfolded what turned out to be a letter, written in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting. "Dear Tommy, if you're reading this, then I've moved on to greener pastures, and you've finally found what I've kept hidden all these years. Might be you found it by accident, or maybe you went looking. Either way, the timing is right, or you wouldn't be holding this letter now. I've watched you grow from a curious boy into a fine young man. You've got your grandmother's kind heart and my stubborn streak. A powerful combination when used right, dangerous when used wrong. The world's changing fast, Tommy. The life I've known, the life I've taught you, it ain't always going to be enough. Sometimes you gotta bend without breaking, adapt without losing who you are at your core. Inside this hat, along with this letter, you'll find a deed. It's for the North Pasture, 200 acres that's been in our family since my grandfather's time. I never told your father about it, and I never added it to the main property. It's been my insurance policy, you might say. Land that's paid for, good water rights, timber on the ridge. It ain't a fortune, but it's a foundation. This land is yours now. Sell it if you must, work it if you can, Share it if you love someone enough to build a life together. Whatever you decide, know that your worth ain't tied to what you own or what job you hold. It's measured by how you treat others, especially when life's got you on the ropes. Remember, a man too proud to accept help is too proud to give it when others need it. There's no shame in taking a helping hand. The shame is in forgetting to extend yours when you're back on solid ground. I'm proud of you, Tommy. Always have been, always will be. With love and faith, Grandpa Sam. P.S. Your grandmother doesn't know about this deed. It was meant just for you when you needed it most. Honor me by taking care of her, will you? I must have read that letter a dozen times, tears streaming down my face. Sure enough, folded inside was a property deed, everything in order transferred to my name upon his death. I remembered that north pasture. We'd ride up there sometimes, Grandpa pointing out the boundaries, telling me stories about how his grandfather had won it in a poker game from a railroad man who'd never even seen the property. I sat on the edge of my bed, hat in one hand, letter in the other, feeling like Grandpa was right there with me, dispensing wisdom from beyond the grave. It wasn't just the land, though that was generous enough. It was the lesson wrapped up in how he'd given it, hidden away, waiting for the moment when I needed not just the gift, but the humility to accept help. The next morning, I called Sarah and apologized. Then I called her uncle and accepted the job offer, explaining that I had some property I'd like to work on the side, if that was all right with him. 2 months later, I asked Sarah to marry me on that north pasture, just as the sun was set in behind the ridge, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "I've got something to show you," I said after she'd said yes, and we'd had our moment of celebration. I handed her Grandpa's letter. As she read, her expression shifted from curiosity to understanding. When she finished, she looked up at me with those eyes that could see clean through to my soul. "He knew you'd need this," she said softly. "Not just the land, but the message. Took me too long to find it," I admitted. She shook her head, placing her hand on mine. "No, Tom. You found it exactly when you were ready to hear what it had to say. We built our first home on that north pasture, Sarah and I. Nothing fancy, a simple 2-bedroom ranch house with a wide porch facing west so we could watch the sunsets. Over the years, we added on as our family grew. First came Samuel, named for his great-grandfather, then Emma 3 years later, and finally little Jack, who came along when we'd just about given up on having a third. I kept working for Sarah's uncle until he retired, then took over as the ranch manager. But every evening, I'd come home to our place, to the land Grandpa had kept safe for me. We ran some cattle, planted hay in the lower field, kept chickens, and a big vegetable garden. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a good living and a better life. Grandpa's hat found a place of honor on our mantle, and every now and then, I'd take it down, put it on, and tell the kids stories about their great-grandfather, about his wisdom, his patience, and how he'd saved our future without us even knowing it. Years passed. The children grew. Samuel went off to agricultural college, came back with new ideas about sustainable ranching that even this old cowboy had to admit made good sense. Emma became a veterinarian, setting up practice in town and coming out evenings to help with our livestock. Jack, our youngest, surprised us all by becoming a teacher, saying he wanted to make sure the next generation understood the value of rural life and the land that sustained us. And through it all, that hat sat on our mantle, a silent reminder of Grandpa's foresight and wisdom. Last month, Samuel announced he was getting married to a lovely girl from the neighboring county. As we celebrated, I found myself thinking about legacy, about passing things down. That night, after everyone had gone, I took Grandpa's hat down from the mantle and held it in my hands, feeling the weight of its history. The next day, I called Samuel aside. We walked out to the ridge overlooking the property, the same spot where I'd proposed to Sarah all those years ago. "Your great-grandfather left me a gift when I needed it most," I told him, recounting the story of finding the letter in the hat. Not just the land, but a lesson about pride and timing and accepting help. I handed him the hat. "This belongs to you now. There's no letter hidden in it this time, but there is something else." He looked at me questioningly as he took the hat. "There's wisdom in its history," I explained, and a reminder that sometimes The most valuable things are hidden in plain sight, waiting for just the right moment to reveal themselves. Samuel turned the hat over in his hands, much as I had done decades earlier. Then, with a nod of understanding, he placed it on his head. It fit him like it had been made for him. "Thanks, Dad," he said simply, but those two words carried the weight of generations. As we walked back to the house, the setting sun at our backs, I couldn't help but think about how life moves in circles. How wisdom, if we're lucky, gets passed down along with the land and the stories and the old hats that have seen better days. And that's the thing about memories and wisdom, friends. They ain't worth much locked away in an attic or hidden in the band of an old hat. Their true value comes when they're shared, when they help the next generation avoid the pitfalls we stumbled into or find the strength to climb out when they've fallen despite our warnings. So if you've got stories, tell them. If you got wisdom, share it. And if you've got an old hat with memories woven into every fiber, pass it on when the time is right. You never know when someone might need exactly what you've kept safe all these years. The sun's almost gone now, slipping below the horizon in a final blaze of glory. Soon the stars will come out, countless points of light that have guided travelers home for generations. Just like stories, just like wisdom passed down, just like love that endures beyond our time. As for me, I still sit on this porch most evenings, watching the sun set over land that's seen 5 generations of my family now. Sometimes Samuel joins me, wearing Grandpa's hat, listening to stories he's heard 100 times but never tires of. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I can feel Grandpa Sam sitting right alongside us, nodding in approval at how things turned out. Life's a funny thing, ain't it? Full of unexpected turns and hidden blessings. Kind of like finding a forgotten letter in your grandpa's hat exactly when you needed it most. Years passed. Seasons rolled through like chapters in a well-worn book, each one adding another layer to the story of our lives. The kids grew faster than I could have imagined, their laughter once echoing through the halls now replaced by deeper voices and distant footsteps following their own paths. Samuel, our eldest, always had that curious glint in his eye. He'd spend hours watching the cattle, asking questions most ranch hands didn't bother with. By the time he left for agricultural college, he was already dreaming of rotational grazing and soil regeneration. I'll admit, I was skeptical. I've been ranching the same way my daddy had, and his daddy before him. But when Samuel came back, educated, focused, full of plans, I listened. Because even this old cowboy could see he wasn't trying to change the land, he was trying to understand it better. And you can't fault a man for wanting to do right by the land that raised him. Emma, our middle child, always had a soft touch. I remember when she was 5 and nursed a barn cat back from the brink with a medicine dropper and sheer determination. No surprise, she became a veterinarian. She set up shop in town, but never lost her love for the ranch. She'd drive out after long days just to check on a calving cow or treat a lame colt. Said it helped her breathe again. And every time I saw her out there in boots and scrubs, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, I saw her mother, Sarah, all over again. Quiet strength, unshakable love. Then there was Jack, our youngest, the dreamer. He was always asking questions that had no easy answers. Why do the stars shine? What happens to a tree after it dies? He read books by flashlight under the covers and had a heart so big it didn't seem to fit in his skinny chest. We thought he'd go off and get lost in the world, but he surprised us. Said he wanted to stay close, teach in the local school, help kids understand what it means to grow up connected to land and legacy. Said if he could plant just one seed of love for rural life, it'd be worth more than a city job with a high-rise view. And through it all, that old hat sat on the mantel. A weathered thing, stained with sweat, sun-faded, edges curled from decades of wear. But it held more than dust and memory. It held story. The day I found that letter hidden in its band, written by my grandfather Sam before he passed, encouraging me to hold my pride lightly and accept help when needed, changed everything. It wasn't just about a piece of land or some old advice. It was about connection, timing, trust. Last month, Samuel stood on the porch with a ring in his hand and a smile that stretched wider than the horizon. Said he was marrying a woman from the next county over. Strong, smart, kind-hearted. The kind of woman who can build a fence, bake a pie, and argue politics at the same time. We threw a celebration the way country folks do. Music, food, family, neighbors. Laughter floating into the night air. Fireflies flickering like sparks of memory. Later that night, when the last guest had gone and only the hum of cicadas kept me company, I stood in front of the mantel and looked at that old hat. I reached out and held it for the first time in years, feeling the familiar weight. Not just the physical heft of felt and leather, but the emotional gravity of everything it represented. A grandfather's love, a turning point, a promise kept. The next morning, I called Samuel aside. Didn't say much, just asked him to walk with me. We took the path up the ridge, past the oak tree where I'd carved Sarah's initials one summer. Stopped at the top, right where I'd proposed to her with nothing but a borrowed ring and a heart full of hope. Your great-grandfather left me a gift when I needed it most. I began, voice a little rougher than usual. I told him the whole story, how I was ready to give up, how I found the letter tucked away in Grandpa Sam's old hat, and how those words gave me the courage to keep going. It wasn't just about the land, I said. It was a lesson, about knowing when to hold on and when to accept help, about seeing pride not as a shield, but a compass. Then I held out the hat. This belongs to you now. There's no letter in it today, but there's something else. Samuel looked at me, eyebrows raised. There's wisdom in it, I said. The kind that doesn't speak loud, but waits patiently. Like the land, like family, like love. You'll feel it when you need it most. He took it gently, like he was holding a relic. Turned it over in his hands, just like I had decades earlier. Then, slowly, he placed it on his head. It fit him better than I expected, like it had been waiting for him all this time. Thanks, Dad, he said softly. Just 2 words. But they carried every story, every lesson, every quiet evening spent on this porch watching the sun melt into the fields. We walked back side by side, the late light painting everything gold. I glanced at him, my son, now a man, and felt the generations behind us fall into step. Like echoes, like roots. That's the thing about life. It loops. It circles back on itself, just like the wind around the barn or the creak of the porch swing. Wisdom gets passed, not in lectures, but in gestures, in hats, in letters, in the quiet ways we show up for each other. And memories? They don't belong in attics or forgotten boxes. They need to be shared, lived again through laughter and stories, through children learning to ride horses or plant corn or listen to the sound of wind in the trees. If you've got stories, tell them. If you've learned something the hard way, share it. And if you've got an old hat soaked in memory, worn soft by time, don't lock it away. Wait for the right moment. You'll know when it comes. Pass it on, because sometimes what someone needs most isn't money or advice or even a hand. It's a connection, a reminder that they come from something strong, something deep, something real. The sun's nearly gone now, casting long shadows over the ridge. The stars are peeking through, quiet and eternal, like the eyes of those who came before us, watching, guiding, just like Grandpa Sam. I swear, some evenings I can almost hear him chuckle, see him nod, like he's proud of how he turned out, proud of Samuel, proud of all of us. I still sit on this porch most nights. Sometimes Samuel joins me, Grandpa's hat tipped back on his head, listening to the same old stories with fresh ears. Sometimes Jack brings a student or 2 by, letting them see a world that doesn't show up in textbooks. And sometimes Emma stops in after a long shift, kicking off her boots and sinking into the swing beside me with a sigh that says this is home. And in those quiet moments, I realize the greatest legacy we can leave isn't land or cattle or even letters in old hats. It's love. It's presence. It's showing up day after day, generation after generation, under the same sky. Samuel's wedding was one of those days when time itself seems to pause, just to take it all in. The ceremony was held out in the pasture beneath the old oak tree. Same one folks say my father first asked my mother to walk with him after church, and the same spot where the kids used to play cowboy when they were knee-high. Clara, his bride, wore a simple dress and a smile that could melt stone. And Samuel, well, He wore the hat. Grandpa's old hat. That alone had more folks wiping their eyes than even the vows. After the ceremony, we danced under string lights and a wide sky full of stars. The kind of stars that make you feel both small and right where you belong. Emma gave a toast, mixing humor and tears the way only she can. Jack read a poem he'd written about roots and wings and the beauty of choosing to stay. And all the while, that hat stayed on Samuel's head like it was meant to be there. Later that night, long after the music had faded and the guests had gone, I found myself back on the porch. The sky was quiet now, the kind of quiet that settles in deep. I could hear the soft sound of Clara and Samuel laughing somewhere inside the house. Their future just beginning. I sat there with a mug of coffee gone cold, thinking about how things circle back. How one man's gift, simple, worn, and silent, could carry so much weight across the years. That hat, it had seen drought and harvest, births and funerals, Sunday mornings and long nights. It had been soaked in sweat and rain and tears. And now, somehow, it had become a part of a new chapter. A few weeks after the wedding, I saw Samuel out by the barn with the young ranch hands. He had the sleeves of his shirt rolled up, the hat tipped back on his head, explaining some new fencing technique he'd picked up from a soil conservation conference. He looked so natural, so confident, like someone who had one foot in the future and the other planted firmly in the past. I didn't interrupt, just stood there for a while, watching him lead. That's when it really hit me. Legacy isn't just about land or possessions. It's about preparing someone to take your place and then having the grace to step aside when the time comes. Later that evening, he joined me on the porch, just like he always had. We didn't talk much at first, just watched the sun melt into the hills, painting everything gold. Then he turned to me and said, "Do you think Grandpa Sam knew? When he left that letter, do you think he knew it would still be helping us all these years later?" I smiled. I think he hoped it would. And I think he trusted that someday someone would understand what it really meant. Samuel nodded slowly, tipping the brim of the hat. "Well, I think I do now." We sat in that comfortable silence, the kind only shared by family who've worked the same soil and told the same stories more times than they can count. The kind of silence that says more than words ever could. And maybe that's the point. Life doesn't hand you answers. It hands you moments, quiet ones, loud ones, joyful, heartbreaking, ordinary, and it asks what you're going to do with them. It gives you sunrises and sunsets, laughter and aching loss. And sometimes, if you're real lucky, it gives you a second-hand hat with more wisdom than most books. So if you've got a story, tell it. If you got an old coat or a beat-up guitar or a dusty hat, don't lock it away. Hand it down. Because you never know what kind of roots it might grow or how deep those roots might go. And if you ever find yourself sitting on a porch, just like I am now, with someone younger by your side, listening to the same stories you once rolled your eyes at, tell them again anyway. Because someday, they'll be the one telling them. And maybe, just maybe, someone else will be wearing your hat. So as I sit here reflecting on all that's come to pass, I want to thank you for listening to an old cowboy's tale. Stories like these, they're meant to be shared, passed down like heirlooms from one generation to the next. And if you found something worthwhile in my rambling, well, that's the greatest gift you could give me. If you enjoyed this journey through memory lane with me, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story from the porch. Hit that like button faster than a jackrabbit on a hot skillet if this tale touched your heart. And leave a comment below sharing a treasured family memory of your own. I read every single one of them. Until next time, remember that sometimes the greatest treasures ain't gold or silver, but the wisdom passed down and the love that surrounds us. This is Tom McCreary, signing off from Whispering Pines Ranch, where the stories are as endless as the Montana sky. Y'all come back now, you hear?